why do we do this? Why would you give an hour out of your week, come out of your way? For lots of reasons. One of them might be those words that come from Albert Schweitzer when he said, "At times our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person." Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. As our befrienders know probably better than anyone in this room, we are nourished by one another in opening our hearts to the lives that others share with us and being able to share our lives with others. It is for that reason, among others, that we come together this week and every week to fashion hope out of the moment before us. It is so much more, but it is at least this. And for that reason, we rejoice and are grateful. That's how we worship, with song. And now I invite you to sing as well. Hymn number 57, "Oh Beautiful the March of Days," something suitable for winter, but also for spring. A very large change that has taken place in church life in the past 15 to 20 years has been what we sometimes call sharing the ministry. It is not a proprietary object owned by professionals like clergy. The reality is that was always true. We always listened to one another, cared for one another. It was we clergy who thought we were important. You knew better all the time. But in the last few years, we're aware now that being conscientious about it and being organized also means we can do a better job as a community taking care of one another. The Befrienders ministry is a way of doing that kind of work, not all of it, but some of it, that extends the capacity to care beyond the limits of a clergy person or just accident. And so we have a team, a leadership team that's been working for several years, and we're about to learn more about them and about people who are joining that team. So I'm going to ask if Arlene Chettleborough and Mary Moore and George Spence and Chris Creek and Mary Peterson can join me up here. You are the leadership team at the moment, and they're going to tell us more about that ministry and help us welcome new members to the team.
Good morning. I'm Chris Creek. I'm proud to be here today to talk about our Befriender ministry and participate in the commissioning service for 8 new Befrienders. The Befriender ministry is a well-structured national program. It's a listening ministry. It requires about 22 hours of training to be commissioned as a Befriender minister. Nuria Love Parrish and Mary Thompson began the program in our church in February 2004. Since that time, we've trained 43 people from our congregation to be Befriender ministers. Our ministers are trained to listen. Confidentiality is essential. Some of the reasons people call for a Befriender are illness, bereavement, aging parents, teen issues, divorce, family problems, loneliness, and depression. The church staff makes referrals to us if they feel that someone could use a listening ear. Since our program began, we have had contact with 125 people who've been referred to our program for a Befriender ministry. Many people that we have served have died. Often their Befriender minister has been with them right up until their death. We're also trained to make bereavement calls to the family that is grieving the loss of a loved one. It's our way of checking in to make sure they're doing okay. Our bereavement program started in September 2008. We currently have 14 active Befrienders, and this morning we'll be commissioning 8, which are included in the 14. Would the previous Befriender ministers who are here today, please stand to be recognized.
Good morning. My name is George. Thank you. My name is George Spence, and I've been a Befriender for about 3 years now. And we are so happy and very excited to welcome our new Befrienders into our team. And if they would come up as I read all the names, there are 8 brand new Befrienders total. Unfortunately, one could not be here this morning that had planned on being here, and that is Michael Cahill. So we'll catch up with him later. But I'd like to begin with Margie Peterson, Dolly Lutz, Tom Logan, Sue Clay, Mary Thompson, Amy Preston, and Earl Hoover.
My name is Mary Peterson, and I'm a Befriender leader. I'm very proud to commission our 8 new Befrienders today. So you have been called forth by this community of faith. Our pledge as Befrienders is to support you in your ministry, to give you guidance and be supportive, and to share your journey as Befrienders. You have responded to a personal call to be of service as a Befriender. You are willing to serve as a listening, supportive presence with those to whom you are called as a Befriender. And you say we are? Do you promise to deepen your understanding of your ministry through continuing education and reflection on your ministry? Do you promise to keep confidentiality? Do you promise to foster, encourage, and receive the gifts of this community?
I've been asked to offer a blessing, and I remind everyone that blessing has its origins in a word that means to bow. So it isn't that it isn't as though I'm above you looking down. It's actually I'm bowing to you and acknowledging the gift of your confidence. And I use that word very consciously because we always hear about confidentiality as though it's a secret. But the word means with faith, to be dependable, that we can depend upon you to do the things you've been asked to do. You're going to be accountable, all those things. But we are all accountable one to another. So my blessing to you is that you embody the confidence in yourself and in this community, in God, in truth and love, that with your presence, your silence, and your love, members of this community will know they are loved and known and valued. You are the church wherever you go. May you bring the blessing of this community into every home you visit and to every life you befriend. Be blessed. Amen. Would you welcome your newest befrienders? So as they sit down, you know the next thing we're doing is the offering. Now, I want you to think for a moment of the hours that these folks who were just trained put in, and that's before they start. And let's think of the hours that George and Mary and Chris and Mary and members of the leadership team and others, and Arlene and others they put in a lot of time. They make a gift of themselves to this church every week. So when we make the offering, it is a chance for you to esteem your own offering to the community, but also to yourself, because every befriender will say, if you ask them, they receive more than they give. Am I correct? So, if it's true that you get more by giving more, do the math. Your offering also enriches you, because it enriches this community and it serves our community beyond us. So with that in mind, I want you to befriend the world, befriend the church, and make your offering one of friendly generosity. Your offering will now be most gratefully received as the choir offers its musical gift to help you. In case you haven't noticed, it's all Haydn today in our worship service. You heard the choir sing a verse from a hymn that we will sing at the end. And, of course, you just heard that rousing piece that is also a hymn in our hymn book, if you look carefully. And, yes, it's about Haydn this week, but not about Haydn. This is another in the Sundays in which I'm preaching musically, in which I lift up pieces of music that have meaning for me and what they continue to teach, inspire, and engage in my life. And so they are like texts in Scripture. To do it this morning, though, I have to tell a number of stories. So I'll start with one that took place 45 years ago when I was the musical director for a college theater group where I was attending in St. Louis, Missouri. Our show that spring was Cabaret, a dark comedy set in a seedy Berlin nightclub during the Weimar Republic era, during the time the National Socialists, the Nazis, were rising to power. I asked the tech room of the auditorium to play some recorded music after the last of the curtain call music as people left to cover their leaving, and I asked them to play the slow movement to this quartet, a beautiful theme and variations, a tune that Haydn actually wrote a little bit before as a gesture of respect to the Kaiser, the Emperor, which is why it's called the Emperor Quartet. Some of you may know which tune I'm thinking about, but for those who don't, let me tell another story. Joseph Haydn was the much older contemporary of Mozart. He was born in 1732, same year as George Washington, which means that at 18, he was studying music while Bach was still composing it. But he lived such a long time in that era that by the time he was in his 60s, he was actually teaching Beethoven, the younger composer. And when he died, Mendelssohn had already been born. So Haydn covers a period from the high Baroque to the beginning of the Romantic era in music. And in between, he virtually created two forms of classical music. The symphony, it exists in the form it does because he made it that way, and the string quartet. Before that, there were other string quartets, but he created the form and the style. And the one you're going to hear in a few moments, the first movement in particular, was written in 1797, which means he was 65, which means he was, of his 68 quartets, he was working on the last 4 or 5 when he was 65 years old. And I feel pretty stupid and humble right about now. And even then, when he completed this group, Opus 76, I believe, a friend wrote about them saying they are full of invention, fire, good taste, and new effects, and seem the production not of a sublime genius who was already well established, but of someone who has expended none of his fire before this. In other words, a youthful experience. These 4 are among his most exquisite compositions, and in this one, I'm going to ask the Perugino String Quartet to give you that first movement so you can get a flavor for that fire, invention, and those new effects of which he was so famous. I'll be back in a minute. that sounded like a typical string quartet to some of you because that's what you expect. When he wrote it, it was novel. In some respects, Haydn was the George Gershwin of his day, combining not only formal music but folk music. Did you hear the thrumming of the cello earlier? That's a folk dance he incorporated into the middle of it, and did it so seamlessly you probably didn't think it was out of place. Haydn was famous because he could play to the audience. You heard "The Heavens Are Telling." That's from an oratorio called "The Creation," and it was a powerhouse play. It was the Hamilton of its day. People wanted to hear that thing. And we'll hear another piece from it in a few weeks. It has energy and appeal. And you probably heard things go faster and slower and quieter and louder, and they were major and minor. That's the genius that he brought to it. So when we think of Mozart, he's great, no question. But for sheer inventiveness and sheer creativity, Haydn is over top of everyone. So I want you to appreciate that. And this, remember, he wrote it when he was 65 years old. I mean, I barely get the laundry done. No, he may have had help. But my point here is that the man had immense skill, talent, and judgment. Now, when I said he died and when Mendelssohn was 3 months old, that was a musical reference. The year was 1809. And if you don't remember, 1809, February, was the same day and year that both Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin were born. So when Haydn died, Lincoln and Darwin were already on the planet. Think about that. A spanning life. Now, a quartet usually consists of 4 movements, as does this one. And you're going to hear all 4, but I've asked them to do it a little differently so I can focus my attentions from a sermonic point of view on the second movement. So I'd like you to hear the third and the fourth. Ordinarily, a quartet has a fast movement, a slow movement, a cheerful little dance movement called a minuet, and that's what you're going to hear, and then a finale. And these are also very different from what you would expect from any other composer. And if you don't know those other composers, go listen to them and then come away thinking, boy, that Haydn was really something. So we're going to hear the minuet and the finale. Go to it, kids. it was a form that friends would used to play at home when they didn't have solitaire on their phones to enjoy. And it was therefore an amateur experience, but that was no amateur piece of music. You really had to be a good musician to do that, and do it persuasively. So if it sounded easy, it wasn't. Now, as I pointed out, I asked them to save the second movement because that's actually where I want to spend a lot of my time, and they're going to share it with us in a moment. And why I'm doing that requires another story. So, 30 years ago, I was in Boston, and I was sitting on a commission that created that hymn book that we use in our seats. Perhaps during a dull sermon, you pulled it out and leafed through it and discovered a few things, maybe read the introduction, and by God, there's my name at the end of the introduction because I'm one of 8 or 9 people who edited and created it. It's the official hymn book of the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is a really liberal religious group. And Mr. Haydn's stuff is all through it. There are at least 3 tunes, and you're going to hear all 3. And why do you make a new hymn book anyway? Well, usually because words need to be updated. Back in the 50s, 60s, we spoke a lot about man, and as opposed to God. And then in the 70s and 80s, women started saying, wait a minute. And so we went back and went through all the words of the familiar hymns and tried to find a way to accommodate a less gendered way of speaking. But you can't open a box and not see everything in it. And there was more than just fixing the words. Hymn books are emotional objects. And that meant we had to look at each one not only as a politically correct thing, but also a spiritually important thing. And we found a problem. We didn't find it, actually, we were told about it. So what I need you to do is pay attention here. We have a text called Light of Ages and of Nations. It's a beautiful text by Samuel Longfellow, the brother of Henry Wadsworth. And it has been in hymn books for 150 years. And it's been in a hymn book because it fits beautifully with the very tune that Haydn wrote for his second movement, the one that he wrote and dedicated to the Kaiser. It's very, very beautiful. But when you hear it, you can also see the problem. And so I'm going to ask them now to play that second movement as Haydn wrote it. And I want you to sit with that music because it's going to be complicated. Light of ages and of nations. That was the tune. Can you give me a little sound here? That's the tune I grew up singing that text. Light of ages and of... But it has another history, doesn't it? If you don't know, it was a tune to which someone wrote words after Haydn died to the Kaiser, surprisingly. And then during the middle of the 19th century, those words were dropped as German unification became paramount. It was no longer about the Kaiser, it was all about being one Germany. And the new song, Das Deutschlandslied, Deutschland, Deutschland über alles in der Welt, was meant to say Germany above all my principalities, meaning Prussia and Saxony. But we know what happened. And if you don't know, you need to know that with the rise of the National Socialists in the 20s and 30s and the establishment of their power, they adopted the first verse of this as the national anthem and made sure that it was played for those arriving at Auschwitz and Dachau and Treblinka. Do you realize Haydn was taken hostage by this horror machine? And it was people who had been through that or their families who came to us when we were writing the hymn book and said, you cannot use this tune. And yet, before 1930, it was just a beautiful tune. How can we separate them anymore? Especially last week with the 75th anniversary of the liberation, if you want to call it that, of Auschwitz-Birkenau. I've not been there, but I have stood on the parade ground at Dachau, a political prisoner camp, where the most famous form of torture was to make people stand at attention all day, unmoving, until they dropped over in pain. You remember it, don't you, Steve? So do I. And there's a stone in my office from that parade ground to remind me that that space is never far away from who we are right now. I also know that off in the corner of the camp, behind some trees, carefully set to one side, there's a brick building with 2 ovens and the sliding racks for the shoveling of bodies into flames. You might remember I quoted Abraham Heschel a week or 2 ago when I spoke of the Holocaust, and he said that some were guilty, but all are responsible. Surely we don't need this tune to remind us, or surely we shouldn't overlook its compromise. But should we bury everything beautiful that is taken hostage by demons? We burn the beautiful along with the evil. The tune is 150 years older than the regime that abused it. What should we do? Well, in the case of the hymn book, we punted. It's hymn number 189 with one tune that is not this, and it's hymn 190 with this tune, because we could not bring ourselves to incinerate Haydn either. And yet it cannot be totally redeemed. Is the price of exterminating evil the cremation of beauty as well? I do not know. There is no easy answer to the struggle between good and evil, between art and ugliness, because we humans make them both. I've cited Martin Heidegger, a great philosopher who was a willing member of the Nazi Party. Joseph Campbell, especially beloved here, has been suspected legitimately of fascist and anti-Semitic qualities. The Me Too movement has reminded us that men that did admirable things did hideous things when we were not looking. The great Nobel laureate of peace, Aung San Suu Kyi, who was a heroine in opposing the military government in Burma and Myanmar, is now legitimating the extermination of the Rohingya. What do we do? Art, evil, truth, delusion, we cannot extricate them one from another. And I don't have an answer. But I do have a story. Not about me. I was the guest of a noble old thinker, wrote Martin Buber, the great scholar of Judaism of the 20th century. He goes on, when the theology students of the university invited me to speak, I stayed with the old man. One morning I got up early to read proofs, and since this preface was a statement of faith, I wished to read it once again carefully before it was printed. Now, I took it into the study below that had been offered me, and here was the old man already in the study at his writing desk. Directly after greeting me, he asked me what I had in my hand, and when I told him, he asked whether I would not read it aloud. I did so gladly. He listened with a friendly manner, but clearly astonished, indeed with growing amazement. When I was through, he spoke hesitatingly, then, carried away with the importance of his subject, ever more passionately. How can you bring yourself to say God time after time? How can you expect that your readers will take the word in the sense in which you wish it to be taken? What you mean by the name of God is something above all human grasp and comprehension. But in speaking about it, you have lowered it to a human conceptualization. What word of speech is so misused, so defiled, so desecrated as this? All the innocent blood that has been shed has robbed it of its radiance. All the injustice that it has been used to cover has effaced its features. When I hear the highest called God, it seems almost blasphemous. The kindly, clear eyes flamed. The voice flamed. We sat for a while facing each other. The room lay in the flowing brightness of early morning. It seemed to me as if a power from the light entered into me. What I now answered I cannot reproduce, but only indicate. Yes, I said, it is the most heavy laden of all human words. None has become so spoiled, so mutilated, just for this reason. I may not abandon it. Generations have laid the burdens of their anxious lives upon this word and weighed it to the ground. It lies in the dust and bears their whole burden. Religious factions have torn the world to pieces. They have killed for it and died for it, and it bears their finger marks and their blood. They draw caricatures and write God underneath. They murder one another and say, in God's name. We must esteem those who interdict it, because they rebel against the injustice and wrong which are so readily referred to God for authorization. We cannot cleanse the word God, and we cannot make it whole, but defiled and mutilated as it is, we can raise it from the ground and set it over an hour of great care. That's what we do with beauty that has been defiled and truth. We raise it from the ground and lift it over an hour of great care. What else is worship? To lift up the things that have been muddied by our imperfections, our evils and our errors, and say, here is a truth we dare not lose. Only here in a house of worship can horror and hope be held in the same hand, truth and terror, love and hate, and we will not explode. We have the strength to bear it. here. Because worship is about holding something over an hour of great care. There's a text in the Christian scriptures. The hour is come and now is when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. We are not there yet. But I know that spirit and truth can lift all things. Even our most imperfect beauties are our most horrid evils. Spirit and truth, and an hour of great care. That is why we worship. That is why we are here. May these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Before I enter into prayer, I wish to give gratitude to the Perugino String Quartet, who played beautifully this most defiled and beautiful of tunes. I wish you now to thank them for their gift this morning. They're not done. We'll hear of it every few weeks they'll be back, and sometimes with friends. So we look forward to their gifts in the future. I save the last moments for prayer because we need all the blessings we can get, and I need them more than you. This morning I lift up especially that we have added 2 new tiles in our memorial tower room for 2 longtime members whose lives have been completed, but we remember them by etching them literally into the stones of this place. Though all our lives are etched in the stones, sometimes we go an extra mile for a few. We look especially for Bob Taylor, whose trombone playing was a blessing and whose smile was larger even than that. And for Tom Chettleborough, Arlene's husband, a befriender before it was official, who loved this church and the people in it. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them, it says. I would invite you now to remember them as we've remembered others in prayer, and ask also for the blessing of forgiveness at this hour. Would you join me in a time of prayer? I think perhaps we need most forgiveness this day, for we have made a world that is as evil as it is good, as ugly as it is beautiful. And yes, there is hope that we can make more beauty and more truth and more love than evil and hate and ugliness. But at the moment, it's hard to tell. We need forgiveness, not only from you, for we know you can and will forgive, but from each other. We must make confession that we have too often overlooked what needed our gaze and been silent when something needed our voice. It is not enough for us to endure. We must secure the future for a world not yet born. And we can only do that if we resolve to lift over an hour of great care our own struggles and redeem from all that would ruin that which gives life. So let us then turn our own struggles, losses, and sorrows into strengths and visions that we may endure and secure and otherwise make tomorrow a place worth going. We do so in the name not only of your good spirit, but of those who have gone before us in this home and in this house, whom we remember this day as we pass the anniversary of their passing. We remember especially Robert Clark, who died this past week, and Jean Kruger, and Betty Newkirk, and Tom LaBelle, and Douglas Hillman, Marjorie Schiffler, and Alan Demarest. God, filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekinah, your presence to the souls of our beloved who have gone to their eternal rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings eternally. Bind their souls to you and to we the living, that they may rest in peace, that someday we may be at peace. And let us say, Amen. And now it's time to sing Mr. Haydn's wonderful tune, number 81. Not the one you heard, but another, which the choir gave us taste of at the beginning. We're going to sing verses 1, 2, and 5 of hymn number 81. Persistence, not for the one good deed or single thought, but deed on deed and thought on thought, until day calling unto day shall make life worth living. Resolved to overcome those things that have beset us in the past, determined that we shall not forget the evils that have been done, nor the beauties we have wrought. We go forth from this house this week, trying to make a world worthy of our presence, knowing that this day and every day is a day which the Lord has made. And so let us rejoice in this work. Yes, rejoice and be glad in it. Amen and amen.